I'm Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, June 5th.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
As usual, we'll start by looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales when they develop, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a dip in the jet where the jet pushes to the north, and you literally can't see anything in the South Pacific. New Zealand there, Antarctica down here, Chile, Peru over here, and instead we see the jet split with the southern branch pushing south down around 60 south, I think the ice line's further south than that, but really no energy indicated, nothing pushing to the north. But we do see something over here, the Tasman Sea, New Zealand there, Australia there, Tasmania there. Tasman Sea is right in this area, and we see a trough trying to build just west of the Tasman Sea. That trough helps create a clockwise flow aloft. That's the hallmark of low pressure in the southern hemisphere and down at the ocean surface. And of course, if low pressure is strong enough, it generates winds. Winds, if they're strong enough as they move over the open ocean, generate seas. Seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area, eventually turn into swell, and swell, when it hits your beach, turns into surf. So right now, nothing going on jet stream-wise, so no real support for gale development, though it looks like the Tasman Sea might have some potential. And certainly, as we get into Monday night, almost Tuesday, yes, we have a trough there. Instead, we have a big ridge over the South Pacific, just locking things down. The trough continues Tuesday into Wednesday in the Tasman Sea, and even more into Thursday. And still, things just lock down. A cutoff trough over here in the far southeast Pacific. It's really, let's go back a little bit. You can see right about maybe there, Wednesday night, Thursday, maybe just a smidgen of hope for the far southeast Pacific, but not particularly good looking. Anyway, moving into Saturday, now the trough builds and almost starts reaching into the southwest Pacific, but not quite. Focus still on the Tasman Sea. Energy, winds to 130 knots, pushing up into that trough, and then continuing into Sunday. Still, the trough just sort of cut off by New Zealand relative to Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast, and then we're out of here, and we're back to the beginning of the model run. Let's go take a look down at the surface. Here we are, surface level pressure, surface level winds, as expected, not a whole lot going on. A tiny little gale south of New Zealand producing 45-knot winds, but it's falling south and all fetch aimed off to the east, so no hope there. As we get into Monday, the gale starts building in the Tasman Sea, little area 45-knot winds, and mostly, though, in the 30-35-knot range. Tuesday, getting stronger as we get into Wednesday, and with broader coverage, 30 to 35-knot winds. The point of this Tasman Sea trough gale is, for one, it could produce swell, it could slam Fiji, but then some of that energy filters through and sometimes makes it into the Hawaiian Islands. But relative to California, not a whole lot is expected. Anyway, we get into Thursday. The gale just continues circulating. Also notice, in fact, let's go back one more time right here. As we get into Thursday, this gale in the far southeast Pacific. I mean, the cutoff for Southern California is about 118, 117 west, so that fetch is barely in there, and then it quickly moves out. Maybe 12 hours of fetch aimed at Southern California. Now, Peru, Mexico, Central America, that's a different story, but we're not really going to focus on that too much. Anyway, we get into Friday. The gale rebuilds in the Tasman Sea, 45, almost 50-knot winds aimed well off to the north, continuing into Saturday, and then even a bit into Sunday. This wasn't here on a previous run of the model run, so even more hope there. Notice the whole low pretty much circulating like over New Zealand. If it could just sneak a little bit off to the east, and we're at 180 hours out, maybe there'd be hope for Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast, but we're a week away. Models not to be believed. but actually the GFS has done a reasonably good job lately, so we'll hold out a smidgen of hope for maybe something developed relative to Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast. So next up, let's go take a look at the effect of those winds on the ocean surface, but we're going back a week, May 29th. A little gale did develop well southeast of New Zealand. We'll call it the Central South Pacific, produced right there, peak seas, 30.7 feet. I mean, 1 pixel, maybe, basically 28-foot seas over a tiny area, lifting off to the northeast pretty good last Sunday into early Monday, and then it faded out. The point being, small swell from that is radiating north for Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast. We're talking fun-sized surf, maybe, I don't know, waist to chest high in the Hawaiian Islands, and not even that in California, but something to ride, because after that, the whole week, last week, literally, though there was significant swell hitting California, virtually nothing was going on down in the South Pacific in terms of potential for generating yet more swell. Let's go look for the next week out. All right, so here we are today, Sunday, June 5th. We're just looking for any sign of, I'll say, 28-foot seas or greater in the greater South Pacific, discounting the Tasman Sea. And the point being, really nothing except maybe over here on Thursday. But you see, in the Tasman Sea, seas start building on Thursday, getting decent. Here's this little gale. We'll go back right there. Yeah. What's that? 26-foot seas, and it's already out of the Southern California swell window. So maybe 24, 25-foot seas for Southern California. So maybe 6 days from there, 14 or 15-second period swell, and really small in size, if it's to be believed at all. And then we move on into the Tasman Sea as we get into Saturday, almost a week from now. This is actually an upgrade. 37-foot seas aimed off to the northeast. By upgrade, I say upgrade from even the Smottles run up to 38 feet. All aimed well. Fiji right in there. All these islands right here will get slammed with swell if this all materializes. But some portion of that hopefully will sneak through relative to Hawaii. And then yet secondary fetch producing up to 32-foot seas. There we are a week out. You get the sense things trying to get going in the South Pacific. The ice line, what, about 63 south, maybe 64 south. So starting to build north. But still, no surf forecast. So the reality is, other than that tiny little system that developed last week and swell from that coming up north, there's really nothing in the pipeline, not for this coming week and not even for the week after that. So 2 weeks of flatness relative to most spots other than Hawaii associated and whatever might happen with the Tasman Sea gale. So that leaves us with wind swell potential. On Sunday, right now, light trades, 10 knots pushing into the Hawaiian Islands, maybe 15 knots, but mostly 10 knots. No wind swell really being generated from that. And light winds, if you can believe it, along the California coast, attributable to a double-barrel low-pressure system in the Gulf of Alaska, cutting the legs out of the standard high-pressure system. But as we get into Monday, here comes high pressure again. Northwest winds 15, 20 knots along the California coast. Light trades for the Hawaiian Islands. And as we get into Tuesday, northwest winds continue. Notice this gale. It really is a gale, 35-knot winds. Now, will that produce meaningful swell? Maybe wind swell along Oregon and California, but nothing too much to get excited about. Local fetch also in the mix. Pretty much Wednesday, same sort of deal. Trades, barely 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. So you get into Thursday, 20, 25-knot winds along the north and central California coast. Good for more wind swell, plus whatever ends up from the low pressure up in the Gulf. More of the same on Saturday, but starting to fade. And then trades finally pick up. We see it here. Let's go back. I kind of missed that, right? Yeah, starting about Saturday, trades start picking up for the Hawaiian Islands. So maybe some pretty short period, smallish wind swell along east-facing shores for next weekend. Sort of the same deal for California. Nothing too impressive, but maybe something to ride at your favorite beach breaks while we wait for something to happen down south. Snow forecast dashboard. We're shifting here to the Pacific Crest Trail, Tioga Pass Resort area. the crossing. This is for folks on the Pacific Crest Trail. No snow forecast. We knew that. It's the snow levels that we're looking at. Right now, the freezing level, somewhere around, we'll say 11,500 feet. But you see it just steadily going up above 14,000 feet and basically staying that for the foreseeable future. So snow continuing to melt at higher elevations with no sign of any additional accumulations forecast. And so that brings us to the long-term outlook. What's going on with the Madden Julian Oscillation, that periodic weather oscillation that either helps to enhance or steal energy from the jet stream in the Pacific, and of course the El Nino Southern Oscillation. We start by looking for signs of the active phase of the MJO, the Madden Julian Oscillation. Two phases in the MJO, active and inactive. They rotate opposing each other on the equator around the planet. One on one side of the planet, one on the other. They rotate around from west to east. When the active phase is over the Pacific, it imparts energy to the jet stream, which in turn helps feed the storm track, which in turn generates gales and therefore surf, more or less. And it also can dampen trade winds over the West Pacific, equatorial West Pacific. That in turn can create a Kelvin wave, that is taking warm water from the West Pacific, start transporting it east under the equator. If you have successive active phases of the MJO, they can create successive Kelvin waves, and that in turn can help usher in El Nino. All right, so we're looking for signs of the active phase of the MJO. Data from the TAO buoy array, series of buoys strung across the equator. East Pacific here, West Pacific here. That is New Guinea there, the equator right there. Dateline right there. We're just looking at the arrows. This is wind speeds, 5-day average wind speed. In the East Pacific, winds pretty strong out of the east. Over the Central Pacific, though, winds starting to slacken off. And for the first time in a very long time, in the West Pacific, trades pretty much neutral, not doing anything, just calm. Anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year. Yeah, the winds are strong here in the East Pacific, but you look at these arrows, they're not very strong. So we'll say light easterly anomalies, but you get to the Central Pacific, pretty much calm. And in the West Pacific, the Kelvin wave generation area, pretty much a normal pattern. This is good, not great, but not bad either. So what's the forecast for the next week? This is zonal wind anomalies, the east-west component of the wind. The blues are easterly anomalies. Think of that as the inactive phase of the MJO. The reds and yellows, westerly anomalies. Think of that as the active phase of the MJO. But this is the whole planet. This isn't just the Pacific. So the date line runs up the middle of the chart, the far West Pacific, about 135 east, so about right there. And the Kelvin wave generation area ends about 170 west. That's the important area that we're most interested in. That's the Kelvin wave generation area is also where all energy gets imparted to the jet stream relative to the Pacific. So blues, easterly anomalies, inactive phase, if you will, of the MJO, and you see that the area we're interested in right in here. Easterly anomalies forecast for the next week. We did have a little bit of a weak Kelvin wave. You can see it pushing from west to east right here across the Pacific. But as of today, it's certainly east of the Kelvin wave generation area now and starting to fade out with the inactive phase looking to set up beyond. Let's go out 2 weeks. These are outgoing long wave radiation charts, fancy words for cloud cover. The active phase of the MJO is like a low pressure system. It generates clouds, less sunlight reflectivity off the ocean surface. So that would be these blue colors here. Okay, and let's get ourselves oriented. South America, Central America, Hawaii, New Guinea right there, Australia, the equator running right through there. Dateline right there. Kelvin wave generation areas, this far West Pacific right in here. We see reds, that is more sunlight starting to build over the Kelvin wave generation area, taking over the Kelvin wave generation area 5 days from now. Think of that as the inactive phase of the MJO, stealing energy from the jet stream, continuing 10 days from now, but then falling apart with a neutral phase setting up 2 weeks from now. This per the statistic model. The dynamic model, we'll leave the last frame here, shows pretty much the same pattern, but the inactive phase holding on a little bit longer. So sort of looks like maybe the next 2 weeks, not great support for gale development. Phase diagrams, an amplification of what we saw before. Statistic model, dynamic model. How do you read these charts? Well, the MJO moves from west to east from the Indian Ocean over the maritime continent to the West Pacific, East Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, over Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. Round and round the planet goes. Heavy dot is where the active phase is. The further it is away from this circle, the stronger it is. So we'll say a moderate active phase of the MJO, somewhere in the far, we'll say, East Atlantic, moving towards Africa. The forecast, 3 different members, suggest it moving to, maybe the far East Indian Ocean 2 weeks from now. The dynamic model, not even that aggressive, suggesting the active phase crashing and sort of lingering somewhere over Africa in the far West Indian Ocean 2 weeks from now. We want the active phase somewhere here in the West to East Pacific area in either one of these charts. No signs of that. In fact, it's already been there and it's done its thing. That likely helped contribute to that run of good southern hemi swell that has been hitting the past 2 weeks, something like that, even though mixed with wind swell. So it's only expected that we'd go into a down phase now for maybe 2 weeks. The upper level model is back and working again. This is up at jet stream level. Areas favorable for precipitation, the greens. Areas not favorable for precipitation, the inactive phase. So the greens would be active phase, yellows, oranges, inactive phase. Let's 8 different panels, 5 days each panel, so going out 40 days, a little over a month. South America, Central America, Y would be right, that little pixel there. New Guinea there. And the equator right there, and the date line roughly there. So the Kelvin wave generation area roughly here. And inactive phase of the MJO is over the Kelvin wave generation area today. Expected to make its trek into Central America by about the 4th of July. The greens, the active phase of the MJO, you see it very strong here over the maritime continent, starting to seep into the West Pacific about the end of June, something like that. So 3 to 4 weeks from now, and then making its trip across the Pacific into the latter part of July, and then the active phase coming behind that. So inactive, active, inactive. The inactive phase still looking a little bit stronger than the active phase. That's suggestive of still La Nina in control, but we think that might be short-lived. And then finally, the 3-month CFS model. Okay, kind of hard to believe a model going out that far, but we'll look anyway. All right, so this is 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies. The blues, easterly anomalies. The yellows, reds, westerly anomalies. Westerly anomalies is what we want to see over the Pacific. This is the whole plan on one chart, the date line running right up the middle. Kelvin wave generation area starts right about here, 135 east, something like that. This is past performance down here. The forecast is up here. And you clearly see a big batch of easterly anomalies forecast, but you see where the center of them, they were here, like even a little bit west of the date line this past winter. They're slowly easing off to the east. And starting in the next couple of days, maybe we'll say June 10th, something like that, they start getting centered at about 150 west, so due south of Hawaii. This is just on the equator. Pretty much take up shop there, while westerly anomalies build at about 120 east and easing into the Kelvin wave generation area. Now, they were supposed to be filling the Kelvin wave generation area a month ago when we were looking at the models. That's backtracked some, but not all that is bad news. Let's overlay the MJO signal here. All right, so the dotted contour is the inactive phase of the MJO. Here, that the solid contour is the active phase. So this is the active phase that just pretty much happened. Inactive phase forecast right behind. But notice, even though it's inactive with 2 contours, light yellow, westerly, if not neutral anomalies forecast in the Kelvin wave generation area. Again, it starts right about there and goes to there, up through into mid-July. And then the active phase comes in, reinforces westerly anomalies, not quite to the date line, to about 170 east. And then the inactive phase comes behind that. So this is starting to look more like just the easterly anomalies in the East Pacific, that will be a problem this fall in terms of precipitation. But in general, it looks like the Pacific is starting to just get into a more normal rhythm with the active and inactive phase of the MJO. In fact, let's overlay the low and high pass filter. Dotted contour, high pressure bias, okay? And that is centered right there, about 150 west. Expected to continue for the foreseeable future. The low pressure bias. So this would be the La Nina indicator. This is the El Nino indicator. It's going to be locked again for the next 3 months, right about 120 east, so right about where it is now. Maybe giving up a little bit of ground. I mean, this model, months out, kind of, it hypes one thing, and then as you get closer, it backs off. I mean, the reality is this line here has been locked solid at 150 east for months now. We expect it probably to do the same thing. If anything, ease a little bit more off to the east, but no clear signs of El Nino developing, but no clear signs that La Nina is going to be raging either. So that brings us to the El Nino, La Nina part of the discussion. What's going on in the ocean? All right, we're going down depth, 100, 200, 300 meters, West Pacific here, East Pacific here. Data from the TAA buoy array. There's buoys strung across the equator. These X's are the anchor lines on the buoys, and the X's themselves are actual sensors on those anchor lines. They collect data. You apply a model to fill in the gaps, and you get a profile of the water temperature down at depth, 29 degrees Celsius. That's pretty warm water. In the far East Pacific, making it to about 171, maybe 171 east. So that's pretty good. The 28 degree isotherm holding steady right at about the date line. The 26 degree isotherm at about 135 west. I think that's where it was last week. And not a whole lot of change here. Warm water in the west, also making it to the east, but not particularly warm. At depth, this model shows things a little bit better. It's actually showing a Kelvin wave reaching to, that's 135 west right there. So a little bit south of California and out in the ocean some, but this is only on the equator. Warm water trying to push across the Pacific according to this model, but we know that is optimistic, and no cold water whatsoever here in the East Pacific. We don't think that's believable. But we hear, look at this other model, probably a little bit closer, suggests, yes, Kelvin wave pushing to about 135 west, which is good, but still there's this persistent pocket of cool water that's getting slowly, ever so slowly squeezed by the Kelvin wave. If it's even a Kelvin wave, it's moving so slow and pushed up to the surface, caught by the trades, and then dragged off this way. But the total volume of warm water here is getting steadily smaller and less pronounced, and eventually that will have some effect on the atmosphere above it. Sea level anomaly data. All right, this is the height of the ocean, not temperatures. The blues look like cold water, but what there are is negative anomalies. So it's satellite data. Take out the waves, take out the wind waves, take out the tide, and is the sphere of the ocean higher or lower than normal? Here's South America, Central America, Baja, Hawaii right there, New Guinea right there, equator there, dateline there. It's only the area 5 degrees north and south of the equator that we're interested in. But you see higher than normal sea heights here on the equator. Warm water at depth expands, creates a bump on the ocean surface, and that's what this is showing. Warmer than normal temperatures over the West Pacific, Central Pacific, and then this last little pocket of cool anomalies, -10, -15 centimeters below normal, right on the Galapagos there. Little bits of it hanging out to about 120 west or a point south of California. So this is at depth confirming the last little pocket of cool water hanging in this area. And then upper ocean heat anomalies, all right? So this is cold water, warm water. West Pacific here, East Pacific here. Okay, going back a year, you see somewhere around July, we got this development of this massive pool of cold water developing in the Pacific, and that set us up for our second year of La Nina in the Pacific going into fall. And then in December, we got a Kelvin wave taking warm water all pulled up here in the West Pacific, pushed it across. We got a little bit of this cool upwelling thing again in March and April, but you see the last little bit of it right here, just like what we saw in the previous chart. In fact, let's go up and look at it. We can do this just like this. There's the Galapagos there. There's that cool pool there. Going down here, you can see it again limited, right? The Galapagos would be right around in there, okay? This is past, and you see the warm water slowly working its way off to the east. We're really looking forward to, this was last updated on the 28th, I believe. So maybe on Monday or Tuesday it'll update again. It's like every 5 days. We're hoping to see this warm water inching off to the east and the cold water retreating off to the east. But we'll see. And then upper ocean heat anomalies. Here we go. Now, we don't normally look at this chart, but this is total volume of heat or cold across the Pacific from the date line to 100 west. The trend is real clear. July 21, that was last summer, the second wave of La Nina dipping down. In February, we got a little reprieve. Cold water again set up in April, the final push. And look, we're almost at normal. And there's a clear trend here. Temperatures since October, so what is that, almost 9 months, have been steadily working their way up, approaching normal. We think this is an impending sign of the death of La Nina. Thank goodness. All right, sea surface temperatures. Now we see warming at depth, but you look at the surface. Here's Chile, Peru, Central America, Hawaii there, the equator right there. Blues, colder than normal temperatures, filling the equatorial Pacific. This is the classic La Nina signature. But you do see pockets of warming. They kind of come and go right along the equator. This area right here was deeply, deeply cold, has been for a while, but it's slowly, ever so slowly losing its foothold. This is the last bit of that cold water at depth pushing up to the surface, being squeezed by that Kelvin wave that's pushing to, where did we say, 135 west, so right about here under the equator. It's pushing this way, taking cold water at depth. You see it squeezing to the surface here, then getting caught by the trades and blowing this way. But there's also this kind of warming thing going on. To me, that suggests the demise of La Nina. Sea surface temperature trend for the past 5 days, and it's only right here on the equator that we're interested in. Yeah, you see sort of generic light warming in the West Pacific right here, but this is the area that we're most interested in. You see light little blue in pockets and a little bit of warming. The last of that cold water at depth still being driven to the surface in spurts and fits, kind of this week making its presence known. Notice also a mirror image of it over in the Atlantic. Maybe there's some atmospheric connection here as well. We'll see what happens. And then the backed off view, again, still a lot of cold water or colder than normal water in the equatorial Pacific for the moment, the most of it right here, but looking far less lethal than it did even a week ago or 3 weeks ago or a month ago. So a much better picture developing. Now here's the fun stuff. The Nina 1.2 index. This is sea surface temperatures today, minus 1.648 degrees below normal. The La Nina threshold is half a degree, so still way below it. But this is just that area right there along Ecuador, the Galapagos, and maybe down into Peru a little bit. Temperatures, we noticed they were falling some. You can see the blue on the 1 week trend chart. And so a little bit of that there. But when you go to the official El Nino monitoring region, the Nino 3.4 index, this is the area on the equator from south of California out to about the dateline. Temperatures creeping up. Again, half a degree below normal is the La Nina threshold. We're at 618 thousandths of a degree below normal, or 118 thousandths of a degree away from at least getting one dot to touch the neutral trend. Now here's something else that's a bit interesting. This is sea surface temperature trend in the Nino 1.2 region. You can see it trying to come up. In the Nino 3 region, a little bit further west, it trying to come up. In the 3.4 region, the area we just look at, it's trying to come up. And in the Nino region, 4 region, it's trying to come up. Now, is this a meaningful rise or not? Maybe not. not yet. But when we get into a little bit more data, some of the forecast data, maybe you'll see this is the beginning of a trend indeed. What's going on in the atmosphere above the ocean? That is also key. What does the atmosphere think is going on? All right, difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. All right, when pressure, Darwin is basically over the Indian Ocean, Tahiti over the Pacific. When pressure is lower over Tahiti, the index goes negative. Well, we're positive today, 23.62, pretty strong. And looking back the past month, we've been nothing but solidly positive. So the atmosphere still thinks at least the inactive phase of the MJO is in control, if not La Nina. Take the noise out of it, 30-day average, plus 17.96. We were up, what was that, up to about 19.42 at one point, even higher than that, 19.20. So maybe a little bit of a downturn, but not a significant downturn yet. And then the 90-day average, the El Nino La Nina indicator, positive also at 16.06. And you can see it's been, if anything, rising a little bit. Let's go take a look at a graph of this data. Here's the 30-day moving SOI, neutral right there. We haven't been anywhere close to it since July of 2020. Strongly positive. That's the inactive phases are stronger than the active phases. The inactive phase is going up, active phase is going down. You can see the trend has been steadily up. We're higher now. We were, was it maybe a week or two ago? That was the peak. Than we were even last year, but much later in the year, in April versus in January. And this steady, slow decline, we want to see a much larger decline, but that won't happen till the sea surface temperatures start warming up. And we see signs that that's happening with warm water encroaching from the west subsurface and temperatures, the big cool pool, seeming to be losing ground. And now the discussion about the forecast looking forward. So we're looking at data from the CFS version 2 model for the Nino sea surface temperature forecast, anomalies for the Nino 3.4 region, the official El Nino monitoring region. All right, and here we are, let's see, April, May, we're just getting into June. The model suggests temperatures rising steady. In fact, pushing over half a degree below normal, pushing over into neutral territory sometime in mid to maybe the 20th of June sort of thing, and then getting up to maybe 0.3 degrees below normal, which the half-degree threshold, that pushes us out of La Nina. Now, you got to be there for like 5 consecutive 3-month periods. Then temperatures as we get into fall, just October, November-ish, barely dipping below the half-degree threshold, and then upwards from there. Now, that's sort of the raw data. The PDF corrected version, which is probably considered a little bit more accurate, same deal, maybe going up to a quarter or maybe even 0.2 degrees below normal, clearly out of the La Nina threshold, and then dipping down to maybe just barely La Nina territory, half a degree below normal for a month, sometime between mid-October and mid-November, and then up from there. I mean, it really looks like, looking at this, that the end of La Nina from a sea surface temperature perspective is going to come maybe in the next 3 weeks. That would be incredibly good news if it were true. Now, there is another model that is a summation of a whole bunch of other models that suggests, well, maybe we're going to hang right at the half-degree threshold into about the October time frame, but then all those other models also suggest this upward trajectory. So one would go, oh, well, good, the sea surface temperatures return more or less to normal as we get into November. Our winter is saved, but the reality is the jet stream has to follow the ocean temperatures, and that isn't going to happen just overnight. It's going to take 3 or 4 months. So probably somewhere in about February or March, all of a sudden, as you're in maybe the core of winter, all of a sudden, things will start looking like normal. We'll start getting precipitation in California. The jet stream will start reorganizing. We'll start getting decent storms pushing over the date line and into the Gulf of Alaska. And maybe, just maybe, we'll eke out the second half of winter will look normal. The fall, not so much. We're not counting on that. In fact, we're probably expecting a pretty miserable fall with strong high pressure filling the Gulf of Alaska. But somewhere around the Christmas time frame, or maybe even a little bit later, some magic just might happen. So for right now, southern hemiswell still in the water, but definitely dropping in size, fading quicker in Hawaii than in California, but by Tuesday, it's all over. Small, and by small I mean really small, southern hemi background swell from a gale previously in the central South Pacific should be arriving Tuesday, Wednesday sort of time frame for Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast, maybe making for some fun size. By fun size, we mean waist-high kind of thing. Some rideable waves, take the kids out, that sort of thing. But nothing too serious, but rideable. But beyond that, right now, South Pacific is a lake. Maybe something happening in the Tasman Sea that'll provide some background swell for Hawaii. And maybe that system will make it into the South Pacific and actually do something southeast of New Zealand. But that's more than a week out. So at least 2 weeks before any meaningful swell shows up, and probably more like 2.5 weeks. And not particularly surprising given that the inactive phase of the MJO appears to be taking over the Pacific, and it might not be till later in June till things wake up again. So maybe a good time to go take some care of business. That said, longer term, well, the CFS model suggesting water temperatures warming to near neutral as we get into January. And it tended to be the most conservative of the models. It's now saying, hey, things are maybe going to get looking better. The other models, the ones in the middle, sort of going, yeah, that's probably not about, that is about right. That's probably a pretty good estimate. So really hard to tell. Sea surface temperatures and subsurface temperatures are all slowly creeping up, all suggesting the tide is turning against La Nina. The question is, when will we officially trip over the threshold, and when will we get in some sort of a more neutral-ish sort of pattern? No expectation we're getting into El Nino, but at least neutral for this winter would be a good thing. All right, if you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribe down the lower right-hand corner. Just click the icon there. You'll get automatic notifications when we post the video. If you have questions, you don't understand something, I know it's a lot of data, just write us a comment. We'd be happy to reply and try to provide you information for whatever it is you might not understand. And other than that, have a good week. Go take care of business, I guess, or get the last of that southern hemi swell. I hope you got some of it, and I hope everyone's safe and doing well. And that is it for this week. We'll do it again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.